Boom! Alright guys, we are back. 40 TV here, and this is another reaction video. Today, I feel like I've been slipping away personally in my own faith. I feel like, you know what, let's bring back more Bible content to this channel. I feel like I just haven't been putting enough emphasis on my faith lately, and it's a pattern I noticed with myself, and maybe other people might be going through the same things as well, where, you know, you start to get some faith, things start to go good. As things get better, you kind of start to slack in the faith department, and then things get worse, and you know, so as of right now, things are doing pretty good in my own personal life, but that shouldn't be a reason why we should start slacking off on that, right? Now, I do want to take a moment to give a quick shout out to Lori. Lori is this lady that we did her roof for. She gave me this devotional, daily devotional, and I thought that was very sweet of her. You know, she didn't have to do it. We did talk about her faith a little bit, and although she's Christian, and I think I'm really more towards Catholicism, she was still very, very sweet about everything, and she gave me some great advice, some great life advice, and I'm really appreciative of that. So, you know, God is good, God is great, and let's jump into this video. I'm gonna react to Exodus. Also, shout out to the Bible Project for having all these amazing videos out.
The book of Exodus. It's the second book of the Bible, and it picks up the storyline from the previous book, Genesis, which ended with Abraham's grandson, Jacob, leading his large family of 70 people down to Egypt. Now, Jacob's 11th son, Joseph, had been elevated to second in command over Egypt, and he had saved his whole family in a famine. And so Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, offered the family to come live there as a safe haven. And so eventually Jacob dies there in Egypt, and Joseph and all his brothers do too. About 400 years pass, and the story of the Exodus begins. Now, that name refers to the event that takes place in the first half of the book, Israel's exodus from Egypt. But the book has a second half that takes place at the foot of Mount Sinai. In this video, we'll just focus on the first half, where centuries have passed.
You know, something I always think about is all this time that passes in between stories. I mean, 400 years, that's generations of people that went without, and then new canon events happening in the Bible. It's interesting how, you know, the last canon event that happened for us is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, or I guess resurrection, right? So it's been now, you know, almost 2,000 years since something that has happened. Makes me wonder if we're almost there, or, you know, how much more time until the next part of our faith happens.
Humanity forfeited God's blessing through sin and rebellion, and so God chose Abraham's family as the vehicle through which he would restore his blessing to all the world. But the new Pharaoh does not view Israel as a blessing. He actually thinks this growing Israelite immigrant group is a threat to his power.
Probably shouldn't have to say this, but this Israelite group is different than the ones we're currently dealing with. But maybe not so much because of how they act, but we'll get more to that.
As in Genesis, humanity rebels against God's blessing, so here, Pharaoh attempts to destroy the source of God's blessing, the Israelites. He brutally enslaves them in forced labor, and then he orders that all the Israelite boys be drowned in the Nile River.
It's interesting because I only see this parallel that, you know, if God is so great, why did he kill so many people? Or why do all these bad things happen? But look at what the Pharaoh was doing, right? I mean, that's not justifiable at all. If God was real, I think we can all agree that there should be some sort of punishment for this guy's behavior, especially since him being the Pharaoh, he has a lot more power to go through with these actions.
His kingdom epitomizes humanity's rebellion against God. Pharaoh has so redefined good and evil according to his own interests that even the murder of innocent children has become good to him.
Let's just unpack that for a bit. He himself is declaring what is good and what is evil, and look where he's taking it. So then I think it's interesting when other people claim, if I was God, or they basically try to project what their version of good and evil is. And, you know, the way I see it is humans with power, they will, there's a saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, I mean, there's just no way for a person to hold that much power, to have the same morality, the ones that they brought in before it, you know? So I think it's just interesting how people try to put out there that they know what good and evil is, that they almost try to hold God up to like a mirror and be like, look at your own actions, when they themselves probably live a very sinful life.
God first turns Pharaoh's evil upside down as an Israelite mother throws her boy into the Nile River, but in a basket. And so he floats safely right down into Pharaoh's own family. He's named Moses, and he grows up to eventually become the man that God will use to defeat Pharaoh's evil. In the famous story of the burning bush, God appears to Moses and commissions him to go to Pharaoh and order him to release the Israelites. And God says that he knows Pharaoh will resist, and so he will bring his judgment on Egypt in the form of plagues. Then God also says that he will harden Pharaoh's heart. And so we're introduced into the next main part of the story, the confrontation between God and Pharaoh. Now, what does this mean that God says he'll harden Pharaoh's heart? It's super important to read this section of the story really closely and in sequence. In Moses and Pharaoh's first encounter, we're told simply that Pharaoh's heart grew hard. There's no implication that God did anything. And so in response, God sends the first set of 5 plagues, each one confronting Pharaoh and one of his Egyptian gods. And each time, Moses offers a chance for Pharaoh to humble himself and to let the Israelites go. But after each plague, we're told that Pharaoh either hardened his heart or that his heart grew hard. He's doing this of his own will. And so eventually, it's with the second set of 5 plagues that we begin to hear how God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So the point of the story seems to be this. Even though God knew that Pharaoh would resist his will, God still offered him all of these chances to do the right thing. But eventually, Pharaoh's evil reaches a point of no return. I mean, even his own advisors think that he has lost his mind. And it's at that point that God takes over and bends Pharaoh's evil towards his own redemptive purposes. God lures Pharaoh into his own destruction as he saves his people.
This is one of those things where it's very confusing, I think, especially this is the first time you heard this story, that basically, not to talk in brain rot terms, but basically God rage baited Pharaoh into point of no return, as they say. But like I mentioned before, look at the things he was doing. When you read just this part of the book, and this is all you know, you might think that God might, I don't know, you might see his actions as being a little bit more nefarious, a little bit more evil in nature, versus the way he reigned on his empire, things that he did to the Israelites. Like I mentioned earlier, there should be some form of punishment. So it's interesting how I've seen some people debate that, like, well, this is a reason why God may not be all that good. It's important to know everything within context.
The final plague, it's the night of Passover, and God turns the tables on Pharaoh. Just as he killed the sons of the Israelites, so God will kill the firstborn in Egypt with a final plague. But unlike Pharaoh, God provides a means of escape through the blood of the Lamb. And here the story stops and introduces us in detail to the annual Israelite ritual of Passover.
The blood of the lamb. If you know a little bit about the Bible already, the lamb is also a reference to God, to Jesus. And it's interesting how there's these connecting, consistent themes throughout the Bible.
The night before Israel left Egypt, they sacrificed a young, spotless lamb and painted its blood.
And that's another thing, a spotless lamb. So it couldn't have any blemishes or whatever, right? And that the sacrifice of this lamb was enough to save them from death, right? And then this is only the second book of the Bible. So think New Testament era. God gave his only son, Jesus Christ, a sinless human. He basically sacrificed himself for all of us. And it's a consistent theme with what's going on right now and what's going to happen hundreds of years from this point.
Out on the doorframe of their house. And when the divine plague came over Egypt, the houses covered with the blood of the lamb were passed over, and the son spared.
There it is. I almost forgot. That is why it's called Passover.
But Pharaoh, because of his pride and rebellion, he loses his own son. And he's compelled to finally let the Israelites go free. And so the Israelite slaves make their exodus from Egypt. But no sooner do they leave that Pharaoh changes his mind. And he gathers his army and chases after the Israelites for a final showdown. As the Israelites pass through the waters of the sea safely, Pharaoh charges towards his own destruction. The Exodus story concludes with the first song of praise in the Bible. It's called the Song of the Sea. And the final line declares that the Lord reigns as king. And then the song retells in poetry what the story of God's kingdom is all about. It's about how God is on a mission to confront evil in his world and to redeem those who are enslaved to evil. God is going to bring his people into the promised land where his divine presence will live among them. This story is what it looks like when God becomes king over his people. So after the Israelites sing their song, the story takes a sharp turn. The Israelites, they're trekking through the wilderness on their way to Mount Sinai, and they're hungry, they're thirsty, and they start criticizing Moses and God for even rescuing them. They say they long for the good old days in Egypt. I mean, it's crazy. So God graciously provides food and water for Israel in the wilderness, but these stories, they cast a dark shadow. And we begin to wonder, could it be that Israel's heart is just as hard as Pharaoh's?
We're about to get into the second part. I just wanted to go over a few things. And it's interesting reading this book because you see that they mentioned about them complaining. And I mean, they were longing to be slaves again. They were trying to I think they were trying to get a group of people to go back. Like, hey, like, can we please go back to being your slaves? It was so much better being your slaves. There's been multiple instances in this book that we're probably about to see that people are very, I don't want to say maybe ungrateful, but, for lack of a better term, that might be it. And it's just interesting how we read the book knowing what the end is going to be. So you see these people acting a fool, thinking like, man, if you just have faith. And I say that to say that when you're going through things, we're basically them. So I'm not necessarily condemning them 100%. From time and time again, it's been proven from this book, if we have faith, everything will be all right, no matter how bad it looks. And before we get to it, I did want to talk about the cross.
There has been, however, much evidence found, archaeological evidence, to show that the crossing was here and that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. Then on the shore coming up out of the Red Sea, on the Saudi Arabian side as well. Now, you should know that coral doesn't grow in sandy areas. It must have rock or something solid to grow on. And this area where they crossed is just pure sand. So these figures are tremendous evidence of chariot wheels that would have come off from the Egyptians as they pursued the Israelites. Now, interestingly, the sea in this area, the ocean floor of this part, gradually goes down and then gradually goes up. Just north and south of this area are deep crevices, deep ravines in the ocean floor where the Israelites could not have crossed. So of the Aqaba finger of the Red Sea, there's this perfect spot where it's sandy, goes down gradually, goes up gradually, but it goes down almost a half of a mile down in the ocean.
Okay, I think we got the point, right? Is that not interesting, right? Is that not like, if it was a fake story, and I'm talking to you guys, maybe like you guys don't believe, but maybe some random person watch this might not believe. I'm not saying that with that alone you're going to believe, but that should be enough to maybe soften your heart instead of hardening your heart. But we're trying to soften your heart to planting the seed to get you to believe. All right, now let's pull up part 2 of the book of Exodus.
The book of Exodus. In the first video, we explored chapters 1 through 18, which tell the foundational story of how God rescued the enslaved Israelites by confronting and defeating Pharaoh, while offering a way of escape through the blood of the Passover lamb. God then delivered his people by bringing them through the waters of the sea and then into the wilderness, where, surprisingly, they grumbled and complained. Now, the second half of the book of Exodus opens as Moses leads Israel to the foot of Mount Sinai, where God invites the nation of Israel to enter into a covenant relationship. And here we reach another key moment in the biblical storyline, because this is picking up and developing God's promise to Abraham. So remember, from the book of Genesis, God promised that through Abraham's family, somehow he would restore his blessing to all of the nations.
Again, there's a lot of foreshadowing in the Bible, but basically promised Abraham that his children, there are going to be more of his children than there are stars in the night sky. Not through him directly, but through one of his offspring. And basically, again, it's another hint towards Jesus, but we'll eventually get to that part.
God says that if Israel obeys the terms of the covenant, they will be so shaped by God's laws and teaching and justice that they will become a kingdom of priests, which means that they will become God's representatives and show all of the other nations what God is truly like. Now, the people of Israel eagerly accept the offer, and so God's presence appears right on the top of Mount Sinai in the form of cloud and lightning and thunder. And Moses goes up as their representative, and God opens with the basic terms of the covenant, the famous 10 Commandments. These are like the basic terms of the agreement, how the Israelites and God are going to relate to each other. And then after this come another collection of commands which fill out the first 10 in more detail.
Another thing too, back to the morality of God, how people, God allows all these bad things to happen. I mean, God literally told us what to do, what not to do. So I feel for people that are hurt and that they want to, that they have this need that, oh man, if only there was more justice in the world, right? But God literally told us what to do, what not to do. It's us at the end of the day who are disobeying him. And that is why we are in the predicament that we are in.
Laws about Israel's worship, about social justice, how they are to live together, all shaping Israel into a nation of justice and generosity that's different from the other nations. So Moses writes down all of these laws, and he brings them down to the people who, again, eagerly agree to enter into this covenant with God. And once they do so, God takes the relationship forward another step. He tells Moses that he wants his holy and divine and good presence to come and dwell right in the midst of Israel, which develops another aspect of God's covenant promises.
I mentioned before, I'm leaning more towards Catholicism than, for example, Protestantism. And this is kind of why these verses, these points reinforce that. Protestants believe, if I have a relationship with God, me personally, I'll be fine. But I mean, even all the way back in the book of Exodus, God is basically make a temple, make a place where we can all gather around me, right? So if that theme is consistent throughout then to now, what religion makes more sense?
In the garden, it was access to God's presence that was lost. But now it's through the family of Abraham that God's presence is becoming once again accessible through this covenant relationship, and first with Israel, and then somehow one day to all nations. So what follows are 7 chapters of detailed architectural blueprints about this sacred tent called the tabernacle. There's an outer courtyard with an altar, and then in the center there's a tent that has an outer room and then an inner room. And then inside the inner room, which is called the most holy space, is a golden box called the Ark of the Covenant. And there's angelic creatures over the top of it. It's the hot spot of God's presence.
You know what's really interesting? Sorry for this squeaky chair. I need to fix it. But I read somewhere, or I saw somewhere, that Hitler, of all people, was looking for the Ark of the Covenant during the Second World War. Might be something to look into.
Israel breaks the covenant. As Moses is up on the mountain receiving the blueprints for the tabernacle, down below at the camp, the Israelites, they're losing patience. And so they ask Moses' brother Aaron to make for them a golden calf idol so they can worship it as the God who saved them out of slavery in Egypt. Now God's presence, it's right there on top of the mountain. They can see it. But here they are below, breaking the first 2 commands of the covenant they just agreed to. No other gods and no idols.
So see what I mean when I say we're told what to do, what not to do. And if we keep doing the opposite, how do we expect things to get better?
Now, what follows is really important. God knows what's happening down below. And so he first invites Moses into his own anger and pain. And he tells Moses what he wants to do, just to wipe Israel out. But Moses intercedes by appealing to God's character. He says, first of all, destroying Israel would be going back on your covenant promises to Abraham. And then Moses appeals to God's reputation among the nations. What would they think if they see you destroying your own people? And so God accepts Moses' intercession, and he relents. And while he does bring his judgment on those who instigated the idolatry, he forgives the nation as a whole and promises to renew his covenant. And it's right here, at this point in the story, that God, for the first time, describes his own character to Moses. He says, the Lord is merciful, he's gracious. He's slow to anger, abounding in covenant faithfulness. He forgives sin, but he will not leave the wicked unpunished. So we have this tension. God is full of mercy, but also he must deal with evil if he claims to be good.
Exactly, right? That's exactly right. Everything that's happening in the world, good or bad, it's because we're just not living up to his standards. And could say maybe they're too high, but why would we not try to be the best versions of ourselves, not individually, but as a society?
And above all, God is faithful to his promises, even though it means he knows he's committing himself to a people who are utterly faithless. And so after renewing the covenant with Israel, God commissions Moses to go ahead and build the tabernacle. And once again, we get 5 long chapters describing in detail the construction of the tabernacle. And it all comes together in the final chapter where the tabernacle's finished. God's glorious divine presence comes and hovers over the tent, and our hopes are high. And so Moses, he goes right up to enter into the tent, and he can't. He actually can't go in. And that's how the book ends. It's really surprising, but not really if you think about it. You can see now how much Israel's sin has damaged the relationship with God in more ways than we realized. So the book opened, remember, with Pharaoh's evil threatening Israel and threatening God's covenant promise. But now, as the book ends, Israel has become its own worst enemy. It's their sin that's threatening the future of the covenant. And so the question as the book closes is, how is God going to reconcile this conflict between his holiness and his goodness and his presence with the sinful corruption of his own covenant people? The solution to that problem is what the next book is about. But for now, that's the book of Exodus.
Again, shout out to the Bible Project. Shout out to them for making great illustrations of the Bible. I do recommend anyone who's interested in learning about the Bible to actually read it, because there is a lot of detail that's not mentioned. And there's a lot of themes that I feel like you don't get to marinate enough in to really understand what's going on. They kind of gloss over a lot of things fairly quickly. Like I mentioned before, the current Israel and the Israel of the Bible that we just read are not connected. I don't see them being the same people, but there's parallels to them still. The last thing they mentioned about people of Israel is that their own sin ended up being their own demise. As much as what's going on in the world today, as much as what's going on in Gaza, I don't want to say too much about that. That's a whole different topic, basically. But it's interesting to see, it's not just them, it's us as well. The more we stray away from God, the more we try to figure out things on our own accord, the more we think we don't need Him, we're better off without Him, the worse things will get. And alright guys, that's everything from me. Thank you guys for whoever got the chance to watch it, and see you guys in the next video.